Well, our final question this week on the Drive-Thru Gym was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from James Whelan in Cardiff, UK. I read a story about Jeff Jarrett coming back to the WWF in 1997 on the promise he would have a program with Steve Austin. Apparently, Steve Austin shut this down. Do you have any recollection of this, and what was your view?
I do indeed recollect this. That's back when Russo had ingratiated himself with Jeff, and I don't know how they ever actually became friends, because Jeff is everything Shitstain hates. Old-fashioned wrestling, Southern, with an accent, blah, blah, blah. And at first, basically the way I understand it is that Russo had somehow convinced Jeff that he should come back, sign that big contract, and that he'd be in the title picture. And it was wasn't it one of those deals right at that point where the guy comes in and has, like they did with Owen one time, they did it with a number of people. When X-Pac came back, they bring the guy in and have one big in-ring interview where he says, oh, this is all real and shit's going to change, and I'm the fucking guy. And then it just peters out like a goddamn wet 4th of July firecracker. That's another hallmark of Shitstain's style of booking. You remember those big debuts, right?
Oh,
where this is real and everything's different.
I think it still happens, yeah.
Yeah. And so Jeff came and was convinced by Shitstain, yes, he's going to have this big fucking main event run and blah, blah, blah. But Steve Austin was still mad because when he worked in Memphis in 1989, he was fucking making $250 a week and eating, baked potatoes because he couldn't afford anything else. And he also didn't think, and to be quite honest, at that time, he was correct. He didn't think that people would buy it or that Jeff was at his level, not at his level as a worker. Jeff, actually, that's the one thing nobody's ever been able to say. He had the best matches in TNA from start to finish. Every great match that TNA had Jeff Jarrett in because he knew what the fuck he was doing. But he had been presented as a mid-card clown with the fucking lip-syncing gimmick in, 94, 95. Then was that before or after he'd done the job for China?
Oh, that was well before.
That was before
that
he came back.
The job for China was the final straw. He never came back.
Yes. And here's the thing. See, this all ties together. So Steve Austin is thinking about the fucking underneath guy, the middle card guy, the lip syncing guy that's been presented there a couple years beforehand. Whatever he'd done in WCW, I didn't pay that close attention. But he wasn't the goddamn champion. And all of a sudden, just because Russo's got this wild hair, he's going to come in and he's going to, with no fucking build, he's just going to, work with the hottest guy in the fucking business. Austin said the same thing he said about Mark Marrow after Marrow got power bombed on pay-per-view by Sable. Nope, not going to happen. Because Steve Austin knew he was the hottest guy in the business and knew how to take care of that until, unfortunately, he was swayed into hugging Vince McMahon on pay-per-view, and that nobody ever recovered. So it was more of fucking Russo having these things that he thinks is just going to be great. And so anyway, then they had Jeff signed. Now Jeff has that run where instead of having a big run with Steve Austin like he thought he was going to have, remember he ended up being managed by Deborah McMichael and whatever the fuck else they did. So and I've loved this. He told me this story himself personally, and I loved it. 2 years later, when that contract is up, that they asked him to sign under these pretenses, and then he, was presented as whoever the fuck for the following 2 years. They let his contract expire 3 days or 2 days before the pay-per-view where he is supposed to drop the title. And Jeff has never had a problem dropping a belt. They wanted him to drop it to China. On pay-per-view, they wanted this guy who signed a 2-year deal, promised to run with Steve Austin, is now the Intercontinental Champion instead, and they want him to get beat by a girl on pay-per-view. And this was when that was the same thing as, here, squat down so it's easier for me to shit in your mouth. That would have been the same response as, we're going to let a girl beat you on pay-per-view. So when JR came to him with it that day, he said, JR, he said, I'll do it for $100,000. That's what I'll do it for. And then he said he walked off. And he walked around the building. And this is what Jeff said. And he said he came back up to JR. He said, JR, make it 2. And that's what he had. He said, I'll do a job for a woman on pay-per-view and drop this belt to China. Give me $200,000. And that's what they gave him. And that is one of the greatest stories I've ever heard, up there along with J.J. Dillon finally getting out of his goddamn deal up there and going in and fucking giving his notice. It took me a year and a half to sell my house, but fuck it, I'm gone. I love that when shit like that, because what the fuck? You should have taken the belt off the guy before the contract was up, and then you're going to ask a guy who was still considering his full-time occupation as being in the wrestling business to do a job for the biggest company in the world on pay-per-view for a woman. So they paid $200,000 for that to get their belt back. And that's why Jeff Jarrett has never worked for the WWF again, and until fucking he never wrestled for him again, but now he's back up there. He's working for him again.
As an agent, yeah.
As an agent. So he can tell all the other people, don't get beat by women unless they pay you $200,000.